love, more joy, everything.
It's inspired young people.
Inspiration comes from within you. When you clear out the garbage that's in your mind, you then create space for something better, more beautiful to come in.
Let's have life and have it more abundantly.
I say yes.
It's like taking a workshop. I get to be in my pajamas.
We have a very active imagination, which is why it's important to learn how to harness it and then point it in the direction you want to go.
I listen to your show every day.
It's time now for Living Your Inspired Life with Susan Burrell. Susan is no-nonsense, inspirational, motivational, and fun.
This is positive talk radio.
Practical wisdom for everyday life.
It's a gift you give yourself.
Now, here's Susan.
And welcome to Living Your Inspired Life. You're listening to News Talk 1590 KVTA. And before we jump into this conversation today, I always like to remind listeners, go to the website. Go to the website. Did I say go to the website? And it's livingyourinspiredlife.org. And that way you can catch up on all the work we've been doing. You can revisit a show. I had a listener email me last week saying, well, I was listening to you having that conversation with that doctor and I didn't catch his website information. Well, go to the website, livingyourinspiredlife.org, and you can find out all the information you may have missed while you were listening, and then listen to it again, because I know I have to listen to things several times. And with that said, I want to welcome our guest today, who has written a book that I have been reading and has been hugely informative in my personal life. So I want to welcome Dr. Amy Banks. Amy, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm very happy to be here.
So I'm going to talk about you a little bit like you're not here.
Okay? I'll pretend I'm not here.
Okay. So Amy was an instructor of psychology at Harvard Medical School, and currently she is now the director of advanced training at the Jean Baker Miller Institute at Wellesley Centers for Women. So that's pretty heavy chops there, Amy.
It's big words, yeah.
Yeah, big words. And so I want to tell everybody the book is called Wired to Connect, The Surprising Link Between Brain Science and Strong, Healthy Relationships. And just the title, Wired to Connect, really explains it all. But when you delve in, at least for me, delving into the book, all the neuroscience and how it connects to, or how it's related to our connection to each other, you explain it really well, even though you use some pretty big words in there.
Yeah, there's some big words, but really my goal with the book was to try to make some of this neuroscience, and particularly the neuroscience that's coming out around human relationships, to take it into and make it into some form that people can actually use, so that it didn't feel as intimidating. So they're big words, but hopefully it's in a context that people can not only understand but use and make very practical.
Well, like I said earlier, everybody, I've been reading this book, and it is very practical. You've got a great explanation up front, and then there is an assessment to take, and then there's an explanation of how to utilize that. And there were some eye-opening things for me when I did that assessment. Yeah, which were, yes.
Yeah, right. I think a lot of people find that, on the one hand, relationships just exist all around us, right? And because of that, we sometimes, I think, get lulled into thinking we have a handle on what they are, what they do, what they're supposed to do, what we're supposed to do in them. And I think the assessment can be really kind of eye-opening, and has been for many, many people, myself included, actually.
Yeah, well, what was interesting that I liked is, I'm in my mid, something.
Yep.
And
me too.
Yeah. And so I've lived a life so far, and I'm in a new relationship that's very healthy and positive. Yep. But to look at the difference between my past relationships, whether it was a romantic relationship or a friendship or a parental, and then the relationships I have now, I was pretty happy to pat myself on the back and go, atta girl, because they are, according to the assessment, healthy, nurturing relationships.
Nice.
And one of the things, a phrase that caught me, you use growth-fostering relationships. So can we talk about that a little bit, Amy?
Absolutely. And let me give credit where credit is due. I use that term, and it actually is a term that came from one of my mentors and the namesake of the institute that I am a part of, it's from Jean Baker Miller. And she was a psychiatrist and an analyst, actually, who was also a social neuroscientist and very involved in kind of trying to change the culture in the world into one that is more relationship focused. And she came up with this, idea of a growth fostering relationship and what she called the 5 good things in a growth fostering relationship, which I use both in my clinical practice but in my everyday life, because a lot of people don't know kind of how do I know when I'm in a healthy relationship, right?
Right. A relationship is a relationship is a relationship.
Exactly. And what she said there are 5 good things, and these are the hallmarks. And I have people compare it. And the first is that when you're in a good, healthy relationship, a mutual relationship, there's a sense of energy or zest. The second thing is you get an increased ability to act, and in fact you do act, both out in the world, but also within the relationship. So if you're angry, you can say you're angry, and you expect that somebody's going to listen and that they care. The third thing is more clarity about yourself, the other person, and the relationship. The fourth thing is a greater sense of self-worth. So when you're in a healthy relationship and your experience is being mirrored and listened to and all of that, you feel better about yourself. And then finally, you have a desire for more connection.
So this is exactly what I'm beginning to experience in a brand new growth fostering relationship, is all of those things of increased ability to state how I'm feeling, my self-worth has gone up,
Yep.
all of those. And what I have always known about myself, but your book, Wired to Connect, reminded me, is that I personally learn best in relationship. I learn best about myself in relationship. Now, is that true for everybody, or am I just an anomaly?
No, you know what? I think it is true about everybody, but the issue is that many people don't have these, so-called growth-fostering relationships or healthy relationships around them, and then it gets very confusing. The physiology of a healthy relationship actually de-stresses us, and most people learn when they're de-stressed, right? But in fact, if you have a whole, network of people that really are kind of undermining your entire stress response system, then it gets confusing, it gets, you get paralyzed, you get literally just the opposite of the 5 good things.
Mm-hmm.
So, do I want to say absolutely every single person learns best in relationship? I think you do, unless relationship is so wired to your stress response system. And, one of the things that I do highlight in the book pretty early on is that the traditional Western culture that we live in, that focuses so much on separating and individuating as signs of health, actually undermines relationship, right? So, all of us are getting a healthy dose of, of stress built into our relationships because we're kind of told that we shouldn't need them in this way.
Right. So I have a quote from your book, Amy, Wired to Connect, which addresses what you just said. You say, a culture telling you that you need to separate from others and be independent above all else is selling you an ancient script, not one that's based on the brain as it is, but the brain as it was. Right. So our brains have changed enough that now we get that we don't have to be separate and alone or...
Exactly. And that's, the old script is what some people will call that reptilian brain, right? Mm. Which really is limited to, the stress response system or the freeze response. And that's, you kind of go it alone and, the environment, you either fight your way out, flee your way out if you're in trouble or navigating, other beings. But mammals, and we're a mammal, have evolved into these creatures that really are community-based and really are, pack animals, if you will. And because of that, and in conjunction with that, let's say, we've literally developed this whole neurophysiology of interaction. And so this whole biology functions better. We've evolved to function best in healthy connection in community.
Okay, but so Amy, as I'm feeling a little stressed right here, I'm just going to talk about me. This is what I do. I coming out of a negative relationship, my stressors were heightened. My adrenals were amped, and I don't think people experience that all the time. This flight or fight or freeze because we all live in a highly stressful society, whether or not it's your primary relationship is causing that stress or your job is causing that stress. So I guess I kind of got used to that being normal, Amy. How do you?
Well, that's exactly right. So if it's normal, if it's familiar, that's just going. It's like the background noise, and it's just going all the time. And so I think that's exactly what happens with a lot of people. Is they might say, "Geez, I feel kind of stressed." They might, or they may be going to the doctors and being treated for ulcers or chronic infections or whatever, and not pairing the two, not pairing the cultural pressure to be hyper independent, hyper competitive, right?
Right.
Climbing the top of the heap, and not having relationships that are calming you, right? That in fact, the focus on getting ahead trumps all else, and actually undermines not only the relationships in your life, but also these pathways that I talk about, the 4 neural pathways for connection. It undermines those, bulks up your stress response system, right? I mean, one of the things we know about the brain and the nervous system now is like this very simple rule: use it or lose it.
Right.
So as you're saying, you're in a relationship that's really stressful, then the stress response system, the sympathetic nervous system, is getting stimulated over and over again. That's getting stronger and louder. And at the same time, the second rule is neurons that wire together fire together. And so what that means is you start making neural networks, and for you, as you've described, the network is relationship, stress, right? Those get paired. And the next thing you know, that's getting played out in a lot of different spheres.
As we're talking, Amy, I live in Southern California, and everybody will understand that's living in California, the 101 and the 405.
Yes.
And what you just described to me is the 405 and the condition it's in all the time.
All the time.
And it also goes into disrepair, because if you're constantly wiring or firing that particular neuron pathway, right, it begins to, like you said earlier, it causes disease in our bodies because
That's
we're
right.
constantly in that stress lane.
Yep, that's exactly right. And that there's long history now of pairing chronic stress to impaired immune system,
Mm-hmm.
right? And now, this is the next little piece to add to that puzzle: isolation.
Yeah.
Chronically needing to be, the best individual at the top of the heap, causes stress, because that's not the way we're built, which impairs your immune system, which causes illness, right?
When you said isolation, Amy, I thought you meant like I need a time out. I just need a time just to not be around people. But it's the same kind of thing, right?
Yeah. Well, you think about it's the degree to which we promote that hyper separation,
Mm-hmm.
right? And in fact, if that's what is the cultural imperative, if you will, then what we're not teaching our kids from the get-go is, what do you do in relationship? What are those really crucial negotiating skills from the get-go, where you learn at age 1 and 2 and 3 how to navigate anger and needs and, I want to do this and you want to do that, right? All of those things that are absolutely crucial. What we learn is, if I want to do this, I'm going to try to kind of step over you and do it.
Right. Well, so I'm going to go back to the
Yep.
growth fostering phrase, because there was another quote in your book that caught me, and you said the flexibility and movement in this there is flexibility and movement in this definition of relationship. You come together experiencing each other, then you move away again so that you can absorb what you've learned. Mm-hmm. Relationships are a dynamic process of experiencing, learning, and integrating your knowledge so that you are able to see both yourself and the other person deeply and more clearly. And that's got to be true across the board in business, just even in social actions.
Yes, that's exactly right. That is, that description. And I think if people apply it to their lives in a lot of different arenas, they're going to say, yeah, that's a description of what can happen, right, in relationship. And we have, the good news is, or the bad news, depending on how life has evolved for any one of us, is the good news is that relationships are ubiquitous. We have them everywhere.
Right. So you're always so the good news is we always have an opportunity to practice then, huh?
Exactly. That's right.
But okay, so one of the things you say is that relationships help to sculpt our brain. Now, I think the old paradigm is, at least in my grandfather's generation, is this is the way it's been and this is the way it always will be.
Yeah, right.
And so the idea of resculpting our brain,
Yeah.
that it's fluid and plastic, if you will. Now that's a fairly new idea.
Yeah, it is fairly new, but it's two things. One is it's really well founded at this point, and two, it's so helpful and hopeful.
Well, it is hopeful. It made me feel like, yay, okay, this.
That's right.
Because
That's right.
for
but
me,
the concept is just as you say. It's an idea of what's called neuroplasticity, and it tosses out that old idea that it used to be. Even when I was in medical school, which was about 25, 30 years ago, 25, something like that. Anyway, but it was the idea that your brains. There's a lot changing in your body, but your brains are kind of fixed, right?
right.
This is what you got, and don't wear it out by doing too many dumb things to your brain, whether it's using drugs, alcohol, head injuries, or whatever. And now what is so incredible in being in the field of sort of mental health or neurology and neuroscience is, seeing the ways that literally new neurons, nerve cells can be formed. And also we know that these neural networks are being reworked literally on a moment-to-moment, day-to-day basis. And so we're constantly sculpting, and then the conversation, switches to what are you feeding your brain, right? How are you pruning it? How are you shaping it, right? How are you sculpting it?
Right. Well, so let's speak a little bit about how you can change it, because I know that people that have chronic low self-esteem, let's just say, not pointing the finger at anybody here, me.
Nope.
But the idea that I can grow more neurons that can wire together, that can join together in a positive way, that the negative modality that I grew up with, that was maybe handed down generationally to me, can be changed into a more positive, life-affirming thing.
Yeah. Well, and what I would say right off the bat is it sounds like you're experiencing that in real time in this new relationship, right?
Yeah. Well, but it also feels like it's a result of work that I did prior to the relationship.
Sure.
To undo the old one.
Yeah, and of course that is always going to be the case, right? Because even in my book, what I talk about is, now that we know how you can change your brain, right? And so there are these different parts. You know how you can change your brain, and now the second part is, okay, you know what? There's actually wiring in your brain that helps you to connect in relationship that can be weaker or stronger depending on what it is being fed, right?
Uh-huh.
So now you start thinking about, okay, how can we intervene in this system? And you are speaking to something really profound, which is an awareness, right?
Right.
My guess is in maybe the old relationship that you had that maybe was more destructive, that somehow, whether it's in therapy or, with a spiritual advisor or kind of an energy person, however, you have gotten some insights maybe about how that relationship impacted you or how you behaved in the relationship. Maybe it played out in, ways that you grew up or whatever. But so you enter into the new relationship, number one, maybe with a different set of awarenesses and kind of being able to participate in it on a different level. True?
Yes, and I also believe that you can always change. It doesn't matter how old you are.
Mm-hmm.
You can be a choice and make a change.
You got it.
But
yep.
I also know there's people out there that just, nope, this is the way I was, I am, and I always will be.
Yeah. That's such a depressing thought, number one, right? But I think a lot of people do get stuck in that place, right? And what that says to me is, that belief system is so, it's like a controlling image. In the work that I do in this community, I work with relational cultural theory. They talk about controlling images, and it's that kind of piece of life or piece of that literally you have ingested, and by that I mean it's been then programmed literally into these neurons, right? So that you feel ineffective in life. You feel like you can't make an feel like you can't change anyone else. And that, that then becomes what you're feeding yourself, right? So it's a self-reinforcing negative spiral. And of course, it's not as simple as to simply, it's to just say, oh, stop thinking that.
No,
right?
you can't sometimes.
Right, exactly. You can't get stuck, out of that. But one of the things that I've tried to do with the book is to, whether if you take the relational assessment, for instance, you get a snapshot look at what are the relationships, what is the quality of those relationships in your life, but as measured by real life, qualities that are important in a healthy relationship, be it trust, communication, ability to tolerate conflict, energy, all of those things that you'd see in a growth fostering relationship. It also will give you a snapshot of your own pathways for connection, right? So
right.
It may be the case that, and I would suspect it is, that person who is in this negative spiral of, nothing's going to change. This is bad. It's always going to be bad. My guess is first pass, you're going to see a very jacked up stress response system.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
I would imagine, yeah.
Yeah, and relationships that are pretty undermining to your health and well-being.
So then, so how do we change that, Amy?
Okay. So one of the things that I think is important, and but I'm gonna bounce it off you. I could run through these 4 pathways very quickly because I think having an awareness of that can really help people kind of understand. Okay, where are the points in here?
Yes.
If I'm going to change, what am I going to change? Because it's hard to just say, okay, change today, right?
Right, and it's all happening internally in an area you cannot see.
Exactly, and so sort of making that, kind of bring that up front, kind of in high relief, can be very helpful.
Yes,
Can I
please,
run
let's
through
go over
those
that.
quickly?
Absolutely.
Okay, so the pneumatic that I use, or mnemonic that I use, a pneumatic would be air pressure. Mnemonic is CARE, C-A-R-E. And that is stands for each of these pathways for connection. So the first one that I talk about is the C, and it stands for a sense of calm that people can get in healthy relationships. This references work that was done by Steve Porges at University of Illinois. And it gets back to what you and I were talking about earlier, the stress response system, the fight or flight, or freeze response, right? So most of us who have had a Bio 101 course, that's what we learned. In fact, that's what I learned in medical school, was the way, that's our autonomic nervous system. Our automatic nervous system was fight or flight or freeze, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what Steve Porges came up with is that he found a whole new pathway in the autonomic nervous system called the smart vagus nerve. And what this does is it innervates, or, the nerves go up into those muscles of facial expression. So your smile, your eyebrows, where, when you meet somebody, you usually lift your eyebrows, those little muscles in your inner ear, in your throat, and swallowing, both your larynx and your pharynx. And what happens is that has a negative impact on your stress response system. So when you go out, and I have people try this, literally, you go out into the world and you greet somebody, right? Even somebody you don't know. A smile, raise your eyebrows, say a greeting. That stimulates your smart vagus nerve, which feeds back to your sympathetic nervous system and says, stand down, you're not needed. It literally calms you down.
Huh.
So that now you can begin to think about this automatic response going onto your body that you don't have necessarily conscious control over, as having these 3 pathways. And ideally, they're suited when you go and meet safe people, smart vagus, calm. Dangerous situations or people, you want your sympathetic nervous system to be stimulated, and then and you can manage it. And then finally, if you're really in life-threatening danger, if somebody's approaching you with a gun, maybe you do. No, hopefully you flee, but then you might freeze. So, a sense of C is for calm. Okay.
Okay. So I have one quick question.
Good.
So if I'm having a stressful day. So what you just said is, if I'm having a stressful day, if I go out to the local coffee shop and I just smile at the person behind the counter, that's going to help reduce my stress.
Yeah, honest to God, that happens. And in fact, you don't even have to go to the coffee shop. One of the things that I have people do in workshops that I give is I do an exercise, a 1-minute exercise positive relational image. And you can, I have people recollect or kind of bring up, imagine, I know that's part of your intro actually, imagine a positive relational moment that you've had, sometime recently or not, and just try it on, embody it. And what people do, you can just see it. It's very interesting asking people to do this. They start imagining it, and as it kind of pulls up in them, right, they're pulling on those neural pathways for connection. And in 1 minute, they often feel calmer. They'll talk about their shoulders feel more relaxed, an opening in their chest. They might smile. It's really fascinating.
That as you're speaking about this, Amy, on Living Your Inspired Life, we often talk about just taking a couple minutes a day to meditate or quiet the mind. And that sounds like a great way to start your day.
Absolutely.
Just imagining that so that your brain is already in a positive firing mode.
Yeah, a positive pro-physiology of relationship moment, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you can start with that. You can do it throughout your day, and it honestly takes 1 minute. I have people look literally on your cell phone. It's a great kind of pro-relationship way to use some of the technology. Those Instagrams, if you have somebody you're really connected to, and you have face shots of them, look at it. You can literally look, smile. You get a little hit, a little exercise, a little workout with Smart Vegas, which is what you want.
Okay, so that calms us down.
Yep.
And
so that's calm.
I have a question. One more question. Sorry.
Sure.
Does that also then begin to fire positive neurons to create a new pathway?
Yes.
Okay.
So that is
what
the
you're saying.
implication. So on all of these things that I'm talking about, right? When you do anything to sort of, stimulate that pathway, right? So literally going out and greeting people. It's kind of, I always say it's like the easiest win-win ever, because usually 9 times out of 10, if not 99 out of 100, the other person smiles and responds, and then they have their Smart Vegas stimulated. So that gets stronger. And what that means is when that gets stronger, your ability to perceive safe relationships as really safe and to then feedback on your stress response system is increased.
Okay.
So you will be searching more for safety in relationships. You'll be able to identify it, and you'll be able to access it.
So it's like an overall health thing to do.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so then the next piece of care.
So the next piece of care is A, and what that stands for is a sense of acceptedness or belonging that people get when they feel, again, embedded in healthy relationship. And this references work done by some researchers, Eisenberg and Lieberman at UCLA, and what they did is they looked at what area of the brain gets activated when we feel socially excluded, right? And we've already talked about the ways that being a human being, actually, we're pack animals, and so belonging, right? Knowing that we have a tribe or community is paramount to our health. And what they did is they did an experiment where they actually did, it's called Cyberball. They brought people in and studied their reactions to being left out of a computer ball toss game. And so one of the things that they found was that most people who were excluded from this game actually felt bad. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
So it's a very benign social exclusion, right? This is cyberball toss. It's not racism. It's not bullying or anything like that. But they felt bad. And then what happened is they looked at what area of the brain activated, and it's a place called the dorsal anterior cingulate gyrus, which nobody needs to know. The most important thing to know is that it's the exact same place that is activated by the distress of physical pain.
Wait, okay, so it's the same place where physical pain happens.
Where the distress. So imagine it, the DACC is like an alarm system. And the alarm system registers. There's a little signal that says, oh, my God, this is horrible. If you have an injury or illness, like you're in danger, right? And that same alarm system also codes for social exclusion.
Wow.
When you're left out, when you're isolated, when you're, any of those kinds of things, that alarm system goes off as well.
So,
right?
And this is something, it could also be where we just think that's happening and not necessarily really happening.
Absolutely. So, one of the other things that is important for people to kind of grasp is that these pathways are built. We have like reflexes almost for all these little pathways when we're born, and then they kind of mature, develop, shape, and reshape in the context of our relationships growing up. If we were that kid that was bullied, right, then that alarm system was activated all the time. Or if we were that kid that was rejected, right, in some way, maybe, if for people who are familiar with what's called attachment literature, right, the insecure attachment with a parent or whatever, where you feel rejected, right? I'm not good enough. So, that was what came out of that relationship. Then you can kind of grow up and have this like red hot alarm system, and then you might perceive a blank face as rejecting, right? Or really misconstrue other people's reactions of you or experiences of you.
Wow, that's really amazing to me.
Yeah,
because and I want us to talk a little later about the whole mirroring system that occurs. But let's complete this first.
Okay. So because the mirroring system will be next. That's
okay,
the R.
awesome.
Okay. But one of the things that I always think is so important to point out is picture this alarm system, right? That you want. I mean, what you want to do is have people that feel safely embedded in their community, right? And if you think about the idea of shunning, which is, this old tribal idea of how you get people to behave, it's by accessing this, right? We're going to make you, put you in pain for doing something bad, right? But think about what happens when you have a society that is hell-bent on separating, right? And what ends up happening, I think, for some people is, number one, you don't figure out or you don't learn how to bridge difference. And so one of the things that we do in our culture is we see difference, and what we do is we immediately sort of judge it and we stratify it.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So you've got these constant, everybody's walking around these voices that are saying, you're not good enough, they're not good enough, you're not good enough, they're not giving. That is just activating this alarm system constantly.
And then there's this idea of because my alarm system may have been activated. You have there was another phrase that caught me in the book called relational paradox, where you said this happens when you're convinced that your friends won't tolerate who you really are, so you decide that the best way to be accepted is to leave a part of yourself out of those relationships. So then if you've been shunned or dissed enough in life, you're just going to not give yourself fully to life. That's right. Not give yourself fully and not have any confidence that if you bring those more vulnerable parts to yourself, the ones that you've judged already, and maybe somebody judged them first, right? Judged to be unacceptable, they get you leave them out, right? Right. Yeah, and this alarm gets louder and louder because you really are in more and more pain because you're not known, right? And everybody wants to be known. Everybody wants to be seen and heard. Yeah. It's really toxic. Yeah, and my last question on this piece. Sure. And then we're going to talk about being seen and heard. Yeah. But when you're saying that it activates the part of the brain that causes pain, so how much of this being isolated in your social groups can actually really create physical pain or
great
disease?
Question. So they've actually looked at this, and people who are more isolated literally experience physical pain as more distressing, and vice versa. If you're in more physical pain, you tend to be more isolated. And now with this new understanding, the thought is, well, that kind of makes sense, right? Because it's a shared alarm system, and so they're both kind of amplifying each other. Yeah. Right. Yeah. And it makes. I have a person in my life who is actually choosing to live that way. That the pain, the physical pain, creates the isolation, and then if people want to come visit, she loves the connection. The next moment, she's like, "Oh no, I can't do that again because I'm in pain." Yeah. And it's like, okay, you're just feeding the vicious cycle. Right. This cycle. Yeah. And I, at one point, I remember kind of when I was writing the book, sort of having this aha moment of, and of course, our narcotic issues in this country are bigger than almost anywhere in the world, right? Because they're painkillers. Right. We set up this culture that so values separation, individuation, we really are creating cycles of pain for people, and then we're medicating them.
Right. Which is not solving anything.
No.
Except
not.
creating more isolation.
Be very clear about that. Yeah, that it's not the answer.
Right.
Right. But
right.
It may be one of the, curious results.
There was a short YouTube clip that was around just, I don't know, a couple weeks ago that I saw about a young man who bought a lotto ticket, gave it to a homeless guy, took the guy into the store to cash it to see if he won, and he won $1,000.
Yeah.
And the homeless, I think the kid was astounded that it was $1,000 lotto ticket, but and the homeless guy was shocked. Yeah. And all of a sudden, this guy that had given him the ticket, he felt so seen and heard by this guy that had given him the ticket. Yeah. And he was his friend, you're my friend. And it was amazing how moved both of them were just by that kind of a connection.
Yeah, that is so cool. Right.
Yeah.
Right. Amazing. Yeah. So should we go to the resonance system or the mirror neuron system?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. So R, CAR, we're down to R now, is the mirror neuron system. And this refers to, again, pathways that are now pretty clear. There's these shared circuitry, some people are calling them, that allows us to understand other people. And what the research is showing is that in order to read you, for instance, if I were reading you, I literally create an internal template in my own neural pathways. Literally, it's like I'm doing what you're doing without doing it, but that activation allows me to have an internal felt sense of what you're doing, feeling, sensing.
Okay, so that sounds to me like you've just described intuition.
Yep.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's very concrete. It's absolutely intuition, right? It's empathy. It's a whole bunch of things, but it's as concrete. And the earliest studies of this that were done in Italy, imagine it's this concrete, right? It's not this, because intuition you often think of, like the third eye,
right.
You know what I mean?
The psychic.
Yeah, exactly. Rather than really, this is the way human beings are built. That the study or the finding was they were looking at macaque monkeys or primates like humans, and a monkey was reaching for something. It's this area F5 in the brain, so literally reaching for something. And another monkey or a human being was watching. And what happened is I think not a human, the other monkey, the area in their brain that would cause them to reach, right, the motor area that would cause them to reach, activated at the same time, but they weren't reaching.
Mm-hmm.
So in their mind, they had created the same scenario, right, so that they knew bodily what this other monkey was doing, experiencing, feeling, all of that.
Okay, that's I love this aspect because for years, when my son was growing up, I was like, no, you really cannot watch that violent television. No, you really cannot play that game war thing, because it goes into your brain. I was right.
Yes, you were right. You were right. Absolutely. Yep. Yeah, and I think there have been studies. I don't have the reference. I think I have it someplace in my book that there have been studies of children watching violent video games, and their aggression goes up in the immediate few hours afterwards.
And then we wonder why there's an increase in crime.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Wow.
Yeah.
So then this mirror neuron system,
yes,
it's important to be aware of it so that we can, how do we utilize it for a positive?
Well, so one of the things, this gets down to that exercise level, right? So, what you hope is that internal system that is registering what somebody else is doing, you hope that it has a certain amount of accuracy, right? And so that you're reading accurately. And again, I often talk about some of these workshops that I give. And, what I'll do sometimes is I'll have people watch a video and say, okay, read what I want you to do. And often this is with therapists, right? So people that are reading other people, kind of 24/7, and we'll say, okay, focus on this character and see what you're reading in them. And what, of course, is interesting is there's a whole lot about. So I'll have a physical experience of what you're having, but then it's also informed by what that particular reaching or thinking or feeling has meant to me in my life, right? What my experiences have been in other relationships. So one of the things that I have people do is something called a spot check, okay? And, it sounds kind of corny in the beginning, but, I say, okay, go, if you're going out with a friend, maybe even your boyfriend or, whoever, you're spending a couple of hours, you guys can each call spot checks. And what you do is you read what the other person is thinking, feeling, kind of what's going on with them. And actually the point of it isn't, it's really to check out, then have them tell you what they're actually thinking or feeling, right? And it's to get kind of a resonance. Your reading system is built in there, but how you make sense of that is a whole other story, right?
I have another quote about the mirroring system from your book, Amy, Wired to Connect, that I just want to insert here because it kind of speaks to that. In a competitive, visually violent world, you're exposed to so much pain that the only way to thrive is to ignore the signals that your mirroring system sends you about other people's feelings, actions, and intentions. Yeah. So it sounds like the spot check then helps you stay aware and mindful of how you really are, what's really happening in the current exchange of relationship that you're in.
Yes, exactly. And it allows you, you talk about that idea of being seen, right?
Right.
The other person, it allows them to really be seen accurately, right? One of the things that I notice that couples do all the time, right, is that they will say, oh, I give him or her everything they need, and then when you actually ask, it's like, no, actually I give that other person everything I need. You know what I mean?
Right.
And it's like, well, you actually, there has to be a whole lot of communication. You might be exerting all of this energy in reading this person and, providing kind of all that they could ever imagine, but it may not at all be what they actually need.
Can we cycle back just for a moment, because I found this fascinating, to the smart vagus thing about that your ears and your smile and your everything's connected.
Yeah.
Because there was something in your book about that you can't you see and hear at the same time.
Yes. Yeah, oh, right. That is work that shows literally, I think what you're referring to is when somebody speaks, right, part of the way that you understand it, right, is yes, you hear the words, but you're also making, like, as you're listening to me right now, the area in your brain that would be making these words is being activated too.
Oh, okay.
Right.
So then is that what helps people to actually hear?
It's what helps people to understand.
Okay.
Okay. So you can hear words. You can hear the, literally that's airwaves moving, right? But part of understanding, really making sense of, is actually you stimulating those pathways in your own brain.
Wow, that's fascinating to me.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. Yeah. And the research that they do is actually they have somebody put like a pencil or something so that those muscles and therefore those neurons are kind of paralyzed. And you actually don't make sense as quickly or clearly of what somebody's saying.
Wow.
Yeah, it's very interesting.
Yeah, when I read that, I was like, oh, I can't imagine. That can't be true.
Yeah.
But
and try it. It's one of those goofy things. Try it with your partner. Try to have a conversation and just hold they're talking and you're just holding a pencil in your mouth. Yeah.
Okay, when I see people around town with pencils in their mouth, I'll know that they've heard our show.
Yeah, exactly, right. And they're blocking everybody out,
That's
right?
They
don't want to hear anything.
That's right. So,
right.
So what's the next piece of care?
So the final piece is the energy. So CARE, E is for energy, and it's the energy that you feel in a healthy relationship, and that's what that is referencing is the extent to which your dopamine reward system is attached to healthy relationships, and at birth, right? That dopamine reward system is a system that sort of gives you a little burst of dopamine and therefore motivation and energy to kind of live your life when you are doing something that's good and healthy for you. So in the very beginning, nurturing, hugging, closeness with your mom or caregiver or whatever, water, milk, food, good food, that kind of stuff, all is connected to your dopamine reward system. And ultimately, that stays connected if you keep that stimulated, right?
Mm-hmm.
That being in relationship is healthy, and learning how to navigate relationships, then they become rewarding, and so that, and unfortunately, of course, you're going to hear this again, a system that really starts to teach kids very early on to separate and individuate really pulls that dopamine relationship connection apart. And then, in my mind, one of the things I really talk about in the book is what happens to people when they pull those apart is you're going to look for other ways to get dopamine, because that's kind of one of the major neurotransmitters that help you with energy and motivation in your life. And, of course, the dopamine reward system now is known to be affiliated and connected to all kinds of addictions, right?
Right.
So we replace relationship in this culture and the dopamine we get from that with substance abuse, shopping, buying, getting, power, all of these things that also stimulate dopamine.
Wow.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that. So part of the care thing then, in the book, you say, use it or lose it.
Yep.
And neurons that fire together wire together.
Yep.
And then in regards to the dopamine, it's repetition, dopamine.
Yeah, repetition, dopamine. Dopamine is one of those transmitters that sort of solidify learning. And some of the researchers in neuroplasticity, as we talked about earlier, Merzenich and some others, actually have created learning programs where, I remember this partly because my son did one of these. It was to work on his reading. And there would be these little exercises he had to do. He'd do 20 of them, really quick little exercises, and then they would shoot across a little cute little, engaging cartoon thing that would stimulate dopamine. And so repetition, then you get a little hit of dopamine. It would kind of solidify the learning, then go back to repetition. Yeah. So anytime you can be enjoying, enjoying what you're learning, enjoying what you're doing, if you're trying to change, these deep-seated relational patterns and change the wiring in your brain, literally, the funner, the better.
I like that.
Yeah.
Well, and it does make you want to go back for more if it's fun.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Yeah. And it's interesting, too, for people that are workaholics and they think that is their relationship,
Yep.
to then be told, no, please go out and have some fun. And I know lots of people that I used to be that way, where I'm like, I don't even know what I would do for fun.
Yeah, right.
And yet so it sounds like that's a vital thing for us to have healthy neurons.
Yeah, playing and fun are vital, right? And and it's not, in some spheres it's valued in this culture, but there's so much focus on working and, and building yourself up, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Which is not, it's just not as healthy.
Yeah, it's not the end all. And ultimately what it's, I'm not saying people have to be slackers, I'm not encouraging that, but, it's really about balance, if you get relationships back into the center of your health and well-being, then it really, I think, fundamentally changes everything else about your life.
Absolutely. And, and I fully believe now in my elder years that, we really are here to be happy and be fulfilled and not lopping off parts of our esteem and ourself trying to meet somebody else's agenda.
Yeah. It's just not necessary. Right.
So, Amy, we have about 5 more minutes.
Okay.
What else from Wired to Connect do you want to bring up for our listeners?
What else do I want to bring up?
Big question.
We've touched a lot of the highlights. I really, I want people to know that it almost doesn't matter how hopeless you are. Getting an understanding, using that, it's sort of the way we're built too, using your cognition to understand a little bit these dilemmas and how you've gotten to where you are, can really kickstart a whole cascade of things that really can dramatically change your life. Now, I've worked in the field of trauma for many years, and one of the things I also want to say is for people out there who are just terrified of relationship, right? And there are many people, who have grown up in violence or what have you. This sense of connection you can start with a pet. Like a lot of people will say, I love my dog. They're so much less complicated, and I think they are. And to know that a lot of this physiology gets stimulated there too.
Oh, okay.
So that's one thing. Is pets are terrific for a lot of this. The other thing is to not hear this as I've got to have somebody attached at my hip 24/7, right?
Right.
Because that easily can then become, oh my God, I don't have somebody attached to my hip 24/7, and I'm a loser and a failure, right? It gets tied back into that whole judgment spiral that just makes you feel, less and less good about yourself and about your life. But to get it that all relationships and all people are drifting in and out of connection, disconnection, and reconnection, right? And that, the extent to which you can move in and out of that is really what builds ultimately what we've called at the Institute relational resilience, and really some confidence that you can build the skills that, when you get really more isolated, that you can kind of climb out of it a bit and find a place of reconnection with somebody.
Well, and what I like about what you've said in your book, Wired to Connect, is that the going in and out of a relationship, whether it's happens daily because your partner's going to work or travels for work or whatever, or with friendships where you don't see a friend for several months or several years, but that's a healthy thing because it also helps you have time to integrate whatever your learning was about yourself.
Yeah. And some people, what often comes up in some of these conversations I have with, but I'm more of an introvert, and what I say is, introvert, extrovert tends to be really about not quantity. It would be about quantity of relationships, not quality, right? Both need healthy relationships, but you maybe don't need as many, right? Or you need more of the downtime to sort of, kind of drift back. And if those pathways are robust and the relationships you do have are healthy and mutual and supportive and, then you're fine being on your own because you're really not on your own. Those relationships live inside of you. Right.
And so let's talk a couple minutes just about the how we can grow our neurons.
Yeah.
Because in the back of the book, you talk about healthy eating habits and exercise and things like that.
Yeah. I mean, I think that, part of that, I end with that chapter on really brain maintenance. And part of it is, or actually a big impetus there was to have people begin to think about their brains in some ways as they have their bodies. We have disconnected our brains from our bodies for a long time now, and get it that, they need certain things. And a lot of the things that a brain needs isn't that complicated. Getting enough water every day, that exercise, that moving your body actually feeds up and helps your brain. There are a handful of things like that that are just that don't even necessarily take more. Some of them don't take more time. Obviously, exercise does, but that you can really improve how these pathways are functioning. Your stress response system, for instance.
Right, and support the new neurons that are beginning to grow.
Exactly.
Because we want them to be able to build a new freeway.
That's right.
Pathway.
That's right. Literally, you want to be able to get this wiring, this growing of new pathways. You want to do it as efficiently as possible, and so the book ends with strategies for brain maintenance. Everything from wearing a helmet if you're doing something dangerous so you don't whack your head, right?
Right.
Taking omega-3 fatty acids, which help literally to build some of those fatty acid myelin sheaths that you have on your brain that make the nerve signals transmit faster, for instance.
And this has got to help with memory and cognition all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. Using your brain.
Your brain.
Yep.
Dr. Amy, thank you so much for joining us. The book is called Wired to Connect, The Surprising Link Between Brain Science and Strong, Healthy Relationships. Amy Banks. And now people can go on Amazon and get your book, yeah?
Absolutely. Amazon, Buck a Book, Book a Million, all of those places, Barnes and Nobles. They should be in a local bookstore, but it's out there now.
Great. Thank you so much for joining us. And
yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, and I'm so glad we got to connect.
Yeah, it was good.
All right.
Take care.
Thank you, Amy. I'm just going to end with, and so it is, namaste.